Hey everyone, it's Audie. This is The Assignment, and today we're talking about one man's journey from suburban dad to, quote, degenerate gambler. My guest today is a staff writer for The Atlantic. His name is McKay Coppins. He spent $10,000 of his employer's money and an entire NFL season diving into the world of online sports betting.
98% of problem gamblers online are men.
Can the manosphere tackle this?
I will tell
seriously.
you, we have tried to pitch this story to the Big Manosphere podcast. I've yet to be booked on any. If anyone's listening, I would be happy to come on and talk to you, Joe Rogan, or anybody else. Nobody wants me.
And I wanted to talk to him because lately, honestly, betting of all kinds has gone mainstream.
We're talking about more than a 2 in 5 shot that those who are putting their money where their mouth is think that the U.S. will acquire part of Greenland by the end of Trump's term.
And it's taken over pro sports completely. We're talking billions in tax revenue and boosted ratings, if only there weren't those pesky scandals.
The sprawling FBI probe into mafia-linked gambling and sports rigging schemes are sending shockwaves across the NBA and the United States.
The interpreter for the LA Dodgers star stole nearly $17 million from him to secretly pay off some of his own sports gambling debts.
So McKay and I talked about what happens to all of us when the bookie's in your pocket. Stay with us. Tell me who you are and what you have done.
McKay Coppins. I'm a staff writer at The Atlantic, author, and new gambler. I have always believed about myself and told people that I don't have an addictive personality because I don't have a lot of vices. I'm a Mormon. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I've never, tried drugs, anything like that. And I had a certain amount of hubris going into this experiment where I just believed that it would be a funny little side plot in my broader investigation of the sports betting industry. And I genuinely did not expect that it would kind of take over my life the way that it did.
And one other thing about your background, because how did this relate to how you saw vice and gambling in general? Like, I know for me now, when a commercial comes on for FanDuel or DraftKings or whatever, I have this moment with my 2 little kids where I want to explain to them this thing that is being portrayed to you as a game, like a Candy Crush, no stakes game. Like,
yeah.
There's so much explaining to do. So for your family coming up, like where was the world of vice?
Yeah, I mean, generally, as a Christian, I have certain beliefs about the dangers of vice. And I will say with gambling in particular, this was a vice that I had never really given that much thought to because I was never really tempted by it. Even if you took away my religious constraints, I probably wouldn't have been a gambler because I thought it was kind of a waste of time. I didn't see the appeal. I don't live near Vegas or Atlantic City. And so gambling itself until the last 7 or 8 years would have required too much work on my part to figure it out, And so
you're one of those people confused how to buy a lottery ticket. Like when Powerball happens, you're like, is there a machine? Is it $1?
Now that you say that, I don't even know if I know how to buy a lottery ticket. So there you go. So yeah, I think that gives you a sense of kind of where I started. But I will also say that as a sports fan, almost through kind of cultural osmosis, I had started to learn more about sports betting because, as you point out, it's so omnipresent in sports media. Like, you cannot watch a game on any channel at any time of the day in any sport, any league, without being bombarded by these neon-soaked ads for online sports books.
With
and so
shockingly famous people.
But it's athletes too, and that's the thing that actually is kind of shocking to me. 10 years ago, the idea that somebody like Tom Brady or Kevin Garnett or Wayne Gretzky would be not only associating themselves with gambling, but becoming pitchmen for online casinos would have been insane. The consensus in organized sports and professional sports for decades and decades was that the leagues needed to keep online sports betting or sports betting in general far away from them, right? That it posed a fundamental risk. And to be clear,
that was because of scandal. Some of the laws that are being rolled back now were born out of a period of scandal. And there are many in our history we'll talk about, but specifically, I think it was 92 that the sort of ban on professional sports
Yep.
betting, as we all maybe grew up with it, came into play. This was not that long ago. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is because you can reach a point where societally people are like, this sucks.
Yeah.
like this doesn't work. Like it becomes a problem. And one of the questions I sort of have going forward is, are we at that point? But before we get
Yeah.
there, you a normal person, we've established, a normal non-gambler, jump into the deep end, getting into the apps, doing it all with your company's money.
Mm-hmm.
And right away, as you're learning to do this, you get some advice from a one Mr. Nate Silver. Didn't expect to see him pop up in this story, but makes sense given in the context. And he gives you some tips like avoid prop bets, avoid live betting, like betting during a game. And my favorite, avoid emotional bets. Because honestly, I think all bets are emotional. I know people think it's science, but I'm like, and so for you, can you describe the feeling of what it's like to place a bet?
Mm-hmm. It's funny when I talked to Nate Silver, he kind of laid out the basic realities of the sports betting economy, which were like, the sports books effectively charge you 4.5% for every bet that you make. So you need to win after taxes, something like 55% of your bets just to break even. There are all these other things that the sports books do to kind of rig the whole system against the average recreational gambler. But, what that should have done was convince me, oh, there's no way to win. What it actually convinced me of was that I was going to be the exception, right? Like if I was just smart enough, if I spent just enough time poring over the lines and the roster updates and the, weather reports and all the other factors that can influence the outcome of a game, I could figure out a winning system and consistently win at gambling. That's an insane thought, I should just say.
Wait, did you have that thought at the time, or in hindsight, after you went through withdrawal, you realized that's the thought?
And well, I did not realize it was insane at the time, but I absolutely had the temptation to believe that I would be the exception. Like something Nate told me in that first call was, I asked him, if I'm starting with 10,000, how much would I have to win for this to be a successful season? And he was almost like perplexed by the question. And he was like, no, you don't understand. If you win one penny, you'll be better than 98% of sports bettors. Like nobody wins at this. You
But somebody wins at it, or else there wouldn't be a bunch of gamblers. Like you had to have a moment where you bet and you were like, oh, this feels good.
Oh, for sure. And my first night of gambling, I think it was the first game of the NFL season. I think I put 5 bets down, some prop bets, some just spread bets, whatever. And at the end of the night, I was up $20. And that first win was the moment where I was like, wait a second, I could be good at this. What if what if I'm actually, secretly a sports betting savant, right? Like who knows? But you're right. Everybody has one win that keeps them coming back.
Yeah.
You don't win over the course of your gambling life. In the long run, the reason this industry is so profitable is because they don't really let gamblers win on a consistent basis.
There was this great line where you were like, I took pride in my mastery of the lingo and the basic betting math. Like, it feels good to be the person who knows something.
You're in the know. You understand the whole kind of gambling economy better than the layperson. And also, you kind of create in your mind this epic battle between yourself and the house, right? Like you're going to figure out how to beat the house. You're going to beat the sports books.
This gets me to an angle that I can only say now because we're in the MAGA era. Talk about the man of it all. Meaning there's an element of this that feels very male. Not that there aren't female gamblers. But
there are definitely plenty of women who gamble. Sports betting in particular is an overwhelmingly male phenomenon. It's, I think, about 70% of online sports bettors are men. 98% of online sports bettors who would qualify as problem gamblers are men.
Wait, how many?
98% of problem gamblers online are men.
Going well.
this is
Can the manosphere tackle this?
I mean, actually, like a really good question. I will
Like,
tell
seriously.
you, we have tried to pitch this story to the big manosphere podcasts. Like the Atlantic wanted me on sports media, which mostly said no because they all take money from the big sports books, and the Manosphere podcast, which like I think this my experience would be really interesting to a lot of them. I've yet to be booked on any. If anyone's listening, I would be happy to come on and talk to you, Joe Rogan, or anybody else. Nobody wants me. And, you know, I on some level, I get it. Like, they don't want to be the moral scolds telling their audiences that, you know, this vice is bad for you. And I don't really want to be that either. I should say sports betting is fun. Like, I get it. I totally understood the appeal the very first night. But to answer your question, it's an overwhelmingly male problem, and it's going to have disastrous social consequences for men as they get older and develop gambling addiction.
Right, which is very different. When I was looking into the history of this, because this kind of thing is cyclical, and I was thinking about some of the turn of the century American movements around both like good government and also moral issues. This is where I took issue with your article, actually. You sort of do this rundown of the history of finger wagging, like all the people who have said gambling is bad. But it was out of context. These were periods where like people weren't just gambling, they were gambling like whatever little money they had whatsoever for a household where a woman could make none. It was usually in the context even of scandal. If you look at some of the turn of the century, I would say like late 1800s.
The progressive era, yeah.
Yeah, where
for
you
sure.
have these states that had state lotteries. Same argument. You're going to build roads and bridges with the money you get. And Louisiana, in fact, they sent out the tickets across state lines in the mail.
Yep.
And it turned out to be a huge scandal, you know, with the postal service and all this stuff. And people came away with the same thing after that period. Hey, we should regulate this. And that's when you saw everybody saying, like, we're going to put this in our constitution. We're not going to do it. And I feel like so many times this conversation falls into you're either a scold, an uncool scold, you know what I mean? Or a person who gets it.
Yeah.
Instead of like, no, we've seen this movie before and it ends horribly.
That is more the point that I was trying to make. There are cycles throughout human history of like, you know, Wild West kind of unregulated gambling booms and then backlash. And we go through this over and over again. And it's not, you know, that's American history, the progressive era, certainly. You go back to like the Puritans, George Washington, like there was, you know, a very strong anti-gambling sentiment. But also you go back to like St. Augustine and Aristotle. Like you could go back to the dawn of human history. Like you said, prostitution and gambling are like two of the oldest industries, right? People have always gambled. And over, we come back to this consensus that gambling as a vice should be maybe tolerated, especially in a liberal society, like a lot of vices. You have to make some room for it, but it should be regulated, stigmatized to a certain extent, and there should be friction to get there, right?
I think the friction, that's where the current argument is that this is different.
Well, because before you had to go to riverboats or red light districts or Nevada to gamble, right?
No, there's always been lotteries and church lotteries.
Well, but on sports in particular, to gamble on sports, you had to go somewhere. Or, I mean, there were racetracks, right?
Yeah.
Or you could gamble illegally, which a lot of people did, we should say, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
There are offshore books in like Antigua that you could call some guy and set up an account. And since the internet's existed, people would be on there.
And horse racing. I think I went to a steeplechase literally like 5 years ago.
And you could go to Native American reservations. Like there were places, but it was not as easy as it's just on my phone. It's an app. It takes 15 minutes to set up an account, put in my debit card information, and then it's with me all the time, right? There is a huge difference between walking around with a casino in your pocket at all hours and having to make some basic effort to gamble. And that's why we see stats like 50% of men between the ages of 18 and 49 have an active online sports book. That's why we see things like a third of 11-year-old boys have gambled in the past year.
I saw that. I saw that in USA Today, and I was like, What?
The gambling has permeated the culture in a way
Yeah.
that it just was not the case before the Supreme Court decision in 2018.
Okay, so McKay Coppins, stay with us. We're going to come right back and talk more about what happens next. Okay, so I had to actually go and look up all the different scandals of the last 6 months, as pro sports in particular has, like, embraced this beast
Mhm.
that is now eating it alive, frankly. The NBA in 2025 and now is still mired in a scandal over, poker, but then also some players maybe tweaking their style of play so that they could, like, be inside information for prop bets. Then
Mhm.
you've got a pitcher's gambling thing, right? In Major League Baseball, throwing specific pitches out of the strike zone, and then even potentially texting from the clubhouse during games. That's one of the allegations. And then, meanwhile, in the college scene, college
Mhm.
men's sports, where you see a point shaving thing. And I think the documents were just unsealed on that in
Yep.
January. So, they are literally in this moment reckoning with this thing that they're now not just a part of, they are yoked to. They are
Mhm.
partners with the thing. They are building it into the apps. They're building it into the sport. And is it doing its job of, like, bringing more people to watch the sport, giving people more a stake in the game? Like, is everyone getting what they want out of this, at least right now?
Yeah, I mean, the deal that the leagues made, the calculation they made when they decided to kind of toss their decades long opposition to sports betting and start developing partnerships with the online sports books was that, look, TV ratings are beginning to decline for our games. Younger fans are drifting away. They're not disengaging from sports altogether, but they're fine watching Kevin Durant highlights on TikTok and not watching
The
entire
whole
games,
game. Yeah.
from beginning to end. Well, what's a way to re-engage those people? How do we get them to actually want to tune into the games, watch the whole time, have them gamble on it, right? If they have some money on it, it's much more interesting. So there are kind of two things that the leagues get out of it. On the one hand, they get direct money, right? They're doing data deals and licensing deals with the online sports books. So that they're getting a lot of advertising money from the sports book. So that's one thing that the leagues get out of this. But the other thing is, there's a whole population of young men who might not have otherwise watched games beginning to end, but now will because they have $50 riding on it in DraftKings.
Yeah. Or will they? I mean, one of the things I was thinking of, a part of your story matched something that one of our producers said, who is a young man, who was talking about this very kind of, honestly, it sounds to me a little bit depressing experience of a game where your second screen, your phone, your bets is like the stakes are it's almost too much stakes now. It's gone
Mm,
from these
interesting.
guys won't watch and they'll watch highlights to now they're obsessed because if somebody steps out of bounds in the third quarter, that
Mm-hmm.
might screw up all of their bets. And
Yep.
it actually sounded like a this is not a sexy word, but like atomized
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
It didn't feel communal. It didn't feel like sports. And I kind of, again, paging the manosphere, this feels like one of those things you want to be like, hey, are we actually having fun here?
So that was an experience that I had a few different times when I was gambling. Like I I thought, especially the first time I went to a sports book lounge to watch a game, that it would be like a classic sports bar experience. Because one of the great things about gambling on sports is you kind of purchase an artificial rooting interest in a game that you otherwise wouldn't care about. And so I was like, oh, I'll go to this sports book lounge. I'll find other people who have bet on the Chargers and we'll all become, fellow Chargers fans for the night together and we'll root along in the game. That wasn't really what happened. When I went, what happened was that everybody was paying attention to these like microscopic uh prop bets within the game, right? And so like, one person had Justin Herbert's over for throwing yards, and other people were rooting for the over for Chargers rushing, and some people wanted the Chargers to win the game but lose the first half, or
You're
vice
also
versa.
watching multiple games at
You have
once.
a bunch of different TV screens, and that's not just a sportsbook lounge experience. That's everyone. Like
Yeah.
I had 4 different games on Sundays, 4 or 5 different NFL games at once that I was paying attention to. And what it does, like you said, is it removes the kind of monocultural experience that sports kind of provides, the communal experience of we're all watching this game together, rooting for or against a certain team. Everybody now is just paying attention to their kind of micro bets on their phones. And it is an interesting, you said atomize, like there's kind of an interesting political parallel here. Like I cover politics as my day job when I'm not gambling. And part of what's happened with politics is because of the rise of conspiracy theory culture and all of that, everybody cares way more about politics than they used to, but it's brutally dividing the country and atomizing them. It's not bringing people together in any meaningful way.
Although, 2 things. One, you actually mentioned conspiratorial thinking as an outcrop of this, like that you're watching a game, something goes wrong, someone fumbles, there's a ref call, and it's not just, "Oh, I hate that athlete for messing up my bet." You also are now like, "Oh, okay, who's in on the scam?"
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I was fascinated reading in real time your description of what your brain is doing.
Right. Is the ref have money on the game somehow? Does some player have money on this and they're manipulating their performance to
which
to
not
win
wrong.
money?
Like based on the scandals.
And that's the thing, right? Like these scandals, what we don't really know is, are these revelations the tip of the iceberg, or are they one-off flukes, right? Is it that athletes manipulating their performance, is that a very common thing that we just don't know about? Or is it statistically anomalous? But it doesn't.
Or is it a good thing, right? Which is the argument you hear from the sort of pro gambling world, which is saying, look, because this is now still because this industry is working hand in hand with the leagues and the state, you actually can catch bad behavior. You can catch gamblers before they slide too far. That like we only know these things because they're doing a way better job regulating it than like some off books bookie type who would have just broke your legs.
Yes, the guy in Antigua or the mob, the mobster who is booking your bets probably was not going to flag to the NBA that there's some suspicious betting activity around a certain game. I actually think that's a pretty fair argument by the sports books, and it is inevitably the case that when you legalize an industry and then regulate it, you're going to get better outcomes in terms of, surfacing corruption.
Yeah, you're going to catch
like
stuff.
That. Yeah, I think that that's true. The point that I'm making, though, is that even if these, scenarios where athletes are manipulating performance or referees or coaches are relatively uncommon, you only need a few revelations to plant the seed of doubt in viewers' minds and sports fans' minds about what they're watching on the court or the field. Because I'll just tell you, like, my experience watching these games, especially after those indictments were announced last fall by the FBI and Justice Department.
Into the NBA specifically? I want to know which scandal we're talking about.
The NBA specifically, although there was kind of a steady drumbeat of scandals after that you pointed out. But for me, I found myself constantly wondering if this was another case. When I would lose a bet, is this another case where somebody involved in the game has money on this and they're manipulating the outcome? And it almost doesn't matter if it's really common or rare, because I also know, this part of my brain knows, that the leagues are embracing sports betting, that sports betting is so intertwined now with professional sports that it's almost impossible to not think about it, right?
So now the league has become the house.
It's
another thing against, it's another Goliath against your gambling David.
That's exactly right.
What's it like to be unhinged? Meaning, what's it like to have that moment where you feel active anger?
Pretty unnerving, honestly. Like there was, I read about this one story where a Arizona Cardinals running back dropped the football right before he stepped into the end zone. He thought he was like a cool flex, like he was tossing it on the ground, but he dropped it right before he stepped in, so it was ruled a fumble. And the team ended up losing. I lost a few $100s on that game. And there was this moment that was really kind of alarming to me because I was seeing myself do it, where I was filled with a completely irrational hatred for this player that I knew nothing about, that I have, I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy. I had
But
no
what
reason.
happened? Like, did you start swearing in your head?
In my case, I started watching and rewatching the clip of the fumble, and then also his comments afterward in the locker room to reporters. And almost against my will, I was like making moral judgments about this player because he in my mind, in the gambler's mind, he had lost me money. I had lost money because of this one guy who did something stupid. And like, it only lasted for, a bit. It's not like I still, hate Amari DeMarcado. Great guy, good player.
Yeah, I mean, you just said his first and last name, totally normal behavior, but yeah, for sure.
But
you like him though.
He's my favorite Arizona Cardinal running back who also fumbled.
My God. I'm checking your Finsta, I'm checking your fake Instagram where you insult athletes. The reason why I ask is because I'm one of those people. I'm so out of it that when I hear people harassing athletes, sending them heinous messages, like threatening their lives, I just think like, what has risen up inside the person who got to that point?
Well, and in my typical life, I feel that way too, not just about people in sports, like people in like everyone who acts crazy and unhinged on social media. I'm always like, guys, what are you doing? Touch grass, right? But like,
I'm down.
Then I felt I felt that moment, that kind of fleeting, intense feeling toward an athlete, and it is not. It's very out of character for me.
Is it like road rage? Like if someone cuts you off?
Yes, right.
Yeah,
where you like briefly lose your mind for no reason, and if you looked back on that moment, if there was like a recording of your life, even like a few hours later, you'd be like, "Yikes!" Like, calm down, right? That's how I felt, but like. I also interviewed this French tennis player named Caroline Garcia, who talked to me about it from the athlete's perspective.
Which I learned from your article is like the most bet on sport.
Yeah, one of the most gambled on sports is tennis.
Not cricket. Not like I was like, how is this possible?
Tennis. It's something about the fact that it's mostly an individual game, right? And so there are fewer variables. That's what the gamblers think. It's really just this one player like going to beat this other player, right? But also, what that means is that the player really bears the brunt of the gambler's wrath when they lose. And she told me she first started getting abusive messages from angry gamblers when she was a teenager. And it's become kind of almost like white noise to her for her whole career. She would just, when she'd lose a match, she would pull up her social media and just see a stream of unhinged messages from people. And she said sometimes she would click on the profile and see that like somebody had sent her the most heinous, vulgar, angry message. And then she clicks on the profile and it's like him with his 1-year-old kid posing and smiling, and she would be like, what is wrong with you?
How can this be the same person?
But and that's the thing. It's the gambling does something to your brain chemistry that really does make you kind of act uncharacteristically, do things that you wouldn't normally do.
Which is the same for a lot of addictions. And I was surprised to see you writing that this feels different because people kind of can't see it coming from the outside.
It's a little easier to hide.
It's still secret. Yeah, like the amount of times in your story you're hiding in the kitchen pantry, McKay Coppins, is both relatable and also a little bit jarring.
Yeah.
Because, your kids like mine know you're in there when you disappear because you're going to get a yogurt and you never came back.
Yep.
But that is the part I want to end on is sort of like how this moment might be different from other moments where you've had deregulation and then backlash or not. Because when I think of past movements, they became collective movements because societally in big communities, people felt the collapse.
Yeah.
Now, with this more atomized experience, since we're using that term, there's also atomized solutions. Like I go and Google and go into the Reddit threads and it's like, this is what to do when your partner has become a degenerate gambler. Like you need to change passwords. You need to have separate bank accounts. You need to sign this document to prevent states from letting you gamble. it's all individual solutions.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, the societal description is this thing is awesome. This
Yes.
thing is fun. This thing is a public good. Even talking about the prediction markets, which we haven't even gotten into here,
Hmm.
Polymarket, Kalshi, which I think CNN, our company, has a relationship with. People are betting on Iranian strikes,
Yep.
right? Like the idea that this is the public square, this
Right.
is where the conversation happens, has spread to all corners past sports.
I tend to agree with you that we are not yet at a place of kind of society-wide frustration, outrage, panic that would cause a collective movement to truly rein in the runaway gambling
Do
industry.
you think it's because we have more credit?
Uh,
You know what I mean? Like,
Honestly, that's probably part of it, and it might take kind of some kind of upturning of the economy where all of a sudden people are really feeling the financial pain of their loved ones' gambling habits, you know. But I actually think we're getting closer. I mean, I have been surprised by the reaction to this piece since it was published. It seems genuinely bipartisan and cross ideological, the kind of growing concern about the gambling industry. And I think the prediction markets are a big part of it. I think that it's possible that when we look back on this era 30 years from now, the way that we're looking back on the 90s or the progressive era, the fact that these platforms emerged where you could bet on whether there will be a famine in Gaza, whether a nuclear weapon will be detonated, how many American or people will be deported from America in a given year. Like, that's almost so grotesque and so dystopian that it might be the thing that kind of finally tips the balance toward the country realizing we have a gambling problem and we need to look more closely at how to regulate this.
so in the end, spoiler alert, your wife doesn't love it. I think you lost something like $10,000, or was that just on one game?
No, 10,000 was the final I started with 10,000 and ended with around $120.
And your kids watched you go through this.
Mm.
How did it change how they talk about these commercials and the idea of gambling?
Well, they became almost kind of inevitably much more fluent in the vocabulary of gambling. My 7-year-old daughter can tell you what a point spread is. My 10-year-old son, every time we watched a game during this whole experience, would ask, okay, who are we betting on, right?
Which is literally like out of a scene from Peaky Blinders. Like I'm trying to, I don't want to again finger wag, right? And be like, that's bad. But it's like, are we feeling good about that?
I would say no, but I would also say, like, so in my case, I have not gambled since the Super Bowl. That was the last bet I placed. I've been
And also went through withdrawal though.
Oh, for sure. And I'm in a kind of detox period now. Still, sometimes when I turn on a Celtics game with my son, I'll have a moment where I'm like, oh, I wish I could put some money on the Tatum over right now, you know? But I've been able to resist. I've actually signed a thing called a self-exclusion form where you basically cut yourself off from gambling. So I don't have access to the apps anymore, at least in Virginia. But my kids have also gone through a detox, right? Like I think in some ways, maybe this is delusional on my part. I think it was a good thing for them to witness, to see how kind of insane it got, how distracted I became, how how consumed I got by it, because they are much more aware now of these ads when they pop up, my son especially. And he'll kind of, he'll sometimes be like, boo, when he sees like a FanDuel ad or whatever, which
Nice.
hopefully that sentiment lasts.
My
But I think,
kids have no sense. And hearing us talk about it, it's so abstract,
right.
And did I make it worse by making it sound illicit?
That is one of my fears in writing this piece, that you can read the whole piece and you get a sense of my journey and all the perils of gambling. I still worry that people are reading it and are like, it sounds kind of fun. Maybe I'll try it. My editor on this piece, actually, after going through the whole editing process with me, which takes a long time at The Atlantic, it's a long piece, on like the very last day as we were closing it, he downloaded DraftKings and he is now gambling on tennis.
Are men okay? Like, for real. Like, this was not the takeaway.
I told him, I was like, Scott, I think you took the wrong lesson. He's like, no, I know. But
I can imagine it. He's like, I can do better than this Mormon.
Totally.
Like, come on. That's not gonna happen to me.
That is, I think that is
Yeah.
probably the takeaway a lot of people had, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Going well. Well, McKay, thank you so much for talking with me. This was amazing. Tell people where they can find your work, professional and otherwise.
Yep. The Atlantic, always worth checking out on any given day. Subscribe, theatlantic.com. You can also find my newsletter, McKayCoppins.substack.com.